Hey, it's Juan here. I chose to make a video for my identity narrative because I would like to talk about tech literacy, the history behind computers and their standardized parts, and how we got to today. But first, a bit of an introduction into how I got so infatuated with technology and why it's such a big part of my life. When I was a kid, I did not know anything about computers. In fact, they were quite intimidating because to me, they seemed very complicated, and no one was ever there to teach me the ropes. Fast forward a couple of years, and one of my friends bought me Minecraft, a block game that has now become the most sold game in the world. Immediately, I got addicted, and that was all I would do, play Minecraft with my friends after school for months on end. Eventually, once that phase of my life died down a little, I didn't just want to play Minecraft anymore. I wanted to play other games, but my laptop couldn't run them because it simply was not powerful enough. Eventually, I just got curious and wanted to make my laptop run faster and smoother. So I went online and started researching and found this enthusiast community of computer nerds, and particularly got hooked with some YouTube channels like Jay's 2 Cents and Linus Tech Tips. I quickly started consuming their content and other content similar to them and absorbing any computer video knowledge that I could find. Now that I became well versed in computers, after saving up for a couple of years, I saved up enough money to buy the parts for a computer and build it once I got to high school. Consequently, this infatuation with technology led me to choose computer engineering as my major in college, and I couldn't be any happier. Now for the rest of the video. Let's talk computers. How do we get from this to this? Well, it came with the standardization of computer parts. You see, a computer is made up of multiple parts that do a specific job, just like a car. For example, a computer has to have these specific parts to work. A motherboard, RAM, storage, CPU, also called the central processing unit, GPU, also called the graphics processing unit, a power supply, and last but not least, a chassis and/or case. Let's start with the easiest one to understand, and that's a case or chassis. This one doesn't necessarily have to have too much history, as you don't necessarily need it to run a computer. Still, it's practical and convenient to have a case or chassis to store all the parts. This doesn't happen all the time, but usually the case is where the power button is placed. For practicality, a case is also used to keep dust outside so dust doesn't accumulate and potentially hurt the components. Power supplies existed since the early 20th century, but in 1958, IBM released their own switch mode power supply. It was proven to be smaller, cooler, more efficient, which has brought them to what they are today. In case you didn't know what power supply is, the main job of a power supply is supplying power to the computer. They are vital because they regulate the amount of current to each component depending on each part's workload. For example, the average person can be working on an essay on Word, and their computer won't draw any more than 10 to 15 watts. But suppose you decide you want to run a game like Fortnite. In that case, your computer will ramp up the demand for power and will start drawing around 2 to 300 watts on an average system. RAM. Everyone has heard of RAM before. It's short for random access memory. Its use case is very useful. It's basically very fast storage. But as soon as you turn off your computer or the program, it deletes the information. RAM is the reason why you can switch between Chrome tabs almost instantaneously, as long as your internet is not holding you back, because all information is stored on your RAM and not your hard drive. If that data was stored on your hard drive, you would have to wait a while before the web page could load entirely, as your computer has to filter through gigabytes of data if not terabytes, to find that one web page. RAM was actually invented by a guy called Robert Heath Denard in 1967. Fun fact, the IBM XT computer released in March of 1983 had only 128 kilobytes of RAM and cost you a whopping $5,000. You can buy a car with that money these days. On to the next component, and that's the motherboard. The motherboard links multiple components together, and it's almost like a highway of computers. It lets the CPU talk to the RAM and vice versa. It connects everything together. Everything is connected to the motherboard. The first motherboard that was used in the computer was in 1981 in the original IBM PC. Over time, motherboards started to become standardized to allow more functionality, like adding PCIe slots for expansion cards like sound, graphics, storage, and much more. Let's talk storage. There are many types of storage technologies. You have thumb drives, floppy disks, CDs, even SD cards. But what has arguably been the most influential in the progress of technological advancement is hard drives. We all, for the most part, know that hard drives do. They store all your data like pictures, videos, documents, games, etc. The hard drive was first introduced in 1956 by IBM with the RAMIC 305 system, initially with the storage of just 5 megabytes, weighing in at a very light 1 ton. The hard drive was an instant hit, as for the first time they have the capacity to hold a big amount of storage and can rely on a hard drive, as even if it fails, if you take the right precautions, you could recover your data. Next up, it's the GPU, also known as the graphics card. The main responsibility of a GPU is to render graphics and or pictures using its ability to compute complex and fast math. The term GPU is also coined by the company called NVIDIA, who claimed to be the one to create the first GPU. The first GPU was the NVIDIA 256 graphics card in 1999. It was revolutionary at the time, as the CPU didn't have to load graphics and was offloaded to the GPU so that the CPU could work on other things. Last but certainly not least is the CPU, or short for a central processing unit. If you spent any time around computers, you know that the CPU is considered the computer's brain. If the motherboard is the stage and the concert hall where the orchestra performs, the CPU is called the orchestra conductor. Now onto the CPU's history. The CPU was first invented in 1971 and it was called the Intel 4004. This also led to the creation of a company called AMD, Intel's direct competitor in the x86 CPU market. A notable advancement in processor space was in 2005 when both Intel and AMD came to be the first to create a dual processor. The importance of a multi-core processor cannot be understated, as before you could only have one task open at a time because CPUs only had one core. Otherwise your computer will not be able to handle multitasking or having more than 2 programs open at once. Imagine not being able to have Spotify open in the background while surfing the web. These are the 7 components to make up a computer. Anything else like mouse, monitors, and even keyboards are considered peripherals. In conclusion, I am happy to be able to share what I know about computers. I hope you learned something you didn't already know before watching this video, and I hope you can apply this knowledge in your everyday life. Have a good day.